Good afternoon, folks. Welcome back to Three's In. So, a few years ago, Carolyn and I were on an RV trip, and we had planned to stop at Marine Corps Air Station Cherry Point in North Carolina. We both really enjoyed that RV park. It was quiet, clean, and just a good place to hang out for a few days. So we pulled onto the base. As we pulled onto the base, this young kid at the guard shack looks up at me, checks my ID card, and he says, "Sir, do you have any weapons on board?" And I looked down at him and I said, "Why, are you running short?" He got to thinking about what I said and just waved me through. Started laughing and waved me through. Well, that was good enough for me. So anyway, we went to the RV park, got set up, and as we're inclined to do, decided to take a walk in the evening. So we're walking around the park, and we get down by the river, and I see this guy standing there fishing. Now, I enjoy fishing, and about that time, Carolyn got a call from her daughter. She said, "Do you mind if I take this?" I said, "No, I'll go right ahead." So I walked down to this guy, and I noticed he had an Air Force hat on, and so we got to chatting, and I said, "Did you serve in the Air Force?" And he says, "I sure did." And I said, "What'd you do?" And he said, "Well, I was a pilot." And we got to talk a little bit more. "What'd you fly?" And he said, F-16s primarily, and a couple of maybe F-4s, F-16s. And I said, where'd you fly at? And he says, "Predominantly out of Nellis, out of Las Vegas." Well, cool. Well, he looked to be about my age, probably a couple of years, within a couple of years. So I said, "Where'd you go to pilot training?" He said, "Well, I went through Randolph." Now, Randolph had just a limited amount of pilots go through in the late 60s, early 70s. I can't remember, maybe 4 or 5 years. So I kind of took a second look at him. I still didn't recognize him. And I said, "Well, what class were you?" And he said, 7107. And I said, "I'll be dang." And I said, "What'd your class patch look like?" Well, I knew exactly what it looked like. He said, "It had a coyote on it." Well, so I looked at him and I said, "What's your name?" And he said, "Don Krempel." And I said, "Don, I'm Bob Holliker." And we looked at each other. He was in my class in the other section. Now, we rotated on the flight line between early week and late week. Same with academics, early week and late week. So we stood there talking, and that was just a treasure for me to talk to Don. I had not seen him in 50 years. And, I'll tell you what, it was just such a great feeling. One of the last times I remember seeing Don was down in the Auger Inn, and he had just had his contact check, and he had anticipated doing better than what he did. Now, I'm sure he did. I'm sure he did great. Don's a good pilot, but I don't think he met up to the standards he had set for himself, because I remember that night he was almost inconsolable. He was standing there looking at his hands and going, "You let me down." And I always remembered that. He just kept looking at his hands, and I can't understand why they failed me on a check ride. Anyway, be that as it may, he did well enough to end up in, I think Don went to T-38s and then maybe F-4s and F-16s, so he did fine. But anyway, I'll never forget that forlorn look on his face that night as he's sitting there staring at his hands. So we sat and chatted, and then he invited us over. He and Pam invited us over for a few drinks, and sat there and reminisced about the good old days at Randolph, and it just was a delightful evening. Well, yesterday I get a call from Mikey. Now, Mikey I've featured in a couple of these other videos. I've known Mikey since 1976. And Mikey says, "Hey, Bobby," he says, "I got somebody here wants to say hi." So I said, "Okay." So this guy gets on the phone. He says, "Hey, Bob." He says, "Don Krempel." Well, Don, I knew, lived in Las Vegas. But the chance meeting of him and Mikey out on the Nellis golf course was just hilarious. Anyway, we sat and talked yesterday afternoon for about 10 minutes or so. Then they had to get on the tee. And it was just so fun talking to Don again. We picked up the conversation right from where we left off. And these are the treasures in my life, these people, like Don and Pam and many, many others. we had that shared experience of that year of pilot training, and although we don't see each other hardly ever. Once we do see each other, it's like we never left. So, Mikey, thanks so much for making that call, and Don, it was so great to talk to you. Take care, folks, and we'll talk to you again soon.